Welcome to the new season of the VB Nation podcast, hosted by myself, Chris Smith, and my brother and running partner in crime, Nick.
Hello, everyone.
So our new season, Ultra Running Diaries, is going to be an honest, open and light-hearted account of two moderately fit brothers training and running our first 100k Ultra. Now, over the course of the season, we'll be sharing anecdotal training stories, we'll be analysing our running data, we'll be talking about the tips we pick up on the way, and of course the highs and lows of scaling from 10k fitness, which is kind of where we started from, to 100k Ultra.
So if you want to hear a relatable, brutally honest account of two normal people training for an Ultra, stay tuned. If you want professional running advice, probably best to switch off now. But having said that, we will get some special guests on in the run up to our Ultra event, as expert advice is always welcome, particularly for a challenge of this scale. So fear not, we'll make the mistakes so you don't have to. So today we're going to talk about running motivation. We're going to talk about getting started with training. We're going to talk a little bit about the mindset of running long distances, which has been a really big part of the shift for us. And we're going to talk about developing healthy running habits.
I think before we start, Nick, with the running motivations, why don't you summarise our current level of fitness as we speak today? Because I think it's important to highlight sort of the starting point for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started our running journey really 2 years ago, didn't we? When we decided to sign up for the Brighton Marathon 2019. And we've run one marathon. That is the one and only marathon that we've done. We've run quite a lot of half marathons. So I think we are regular runners now. I wouldn't say that we've mastered the marathon distance. We've taken part in numerous events. Brighton Marathon, fantastic experience. I know that we've referenced that on future or past seasons, of the VB Nation podcast. So yeah, a reasonable amount of running, but when you consider what we are about to do, perhaps not as much as I would have liked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we're starting from a pretty low starting point, but that does mean obviously the only way is up. So, I mean, we'll come on to a bit of the feedback we've had about the event we're doing and the starting point that we've begun at. But if we go then onto running motivations, why don't you tell everyone what we're actually doing, when we're doing it, and why we're doing it?
Yeah, so we're running an event called the Canterbury Trails, which is run by a company that we've got no affiliation to called Race. They're a really well-established ultra running company. The event is in August. It's on the 7th of August. So there's a reasonable amount of time to go, which is great. It starts in London, finishes in Canterbury, 100 kilometers. As we've already said, it's a nice beginner ultra because it's about 80% of the way on paved surfaces and 20% on trails. So it's pretty flat as well. So in terms of picking one to start with, I think it's a really good choice. The support is really good. It's been running for several years now, so really looking forward to it. We're doing it for charity. And I know I'm going to ask you a question in a moment, Chris, which I think is going to expand on this, but we're doing it for a charity called Myeloma UK. This is quite a personal charity from our point of view, because it's something that our dad is battling at the moment. So a lot of the motivation really, I think, comes from raising awareness. And that's where the seed of the idea was planted, really, wasn't it? In terms of trying to find something big enough to really kind of put this charity in the spotlight amongst our circles. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a really good event. And what I wanted to ask you, Chris, because I know that doing something like this is a massive commitment, which is what we're going to kind of expand on a little bit more in this episode. But what for you is the single most important thing when it comes to running an ultra marathon in terms of motivation?
Well, something I've learned already, actually. So, I mean, we've been properly training now for maybe 2 months, but I guess over the pandemic period during lockdowns, we've both done virtual challenges, and we have quite a lot of advice from our cousin James Randall, who also serves as like an ultra coach to us almost. He is someone as well who has done quite a lot of the rat race events previously, although never the Canterbury Trails event. But I think the one thing I've already learned is that you need to want it really badly, because the marathon was hard enough, it was time consuming enough, it was physically and mentally difficult enough, but this is on another level now. And I think that because it's such a big commitment from that time point of view and the physical and mental point of view, you really need to want it. Obviously, there are keen runners out there who, you know, love ultra running purely for the thrill of ultra running. But for like a normal guy like, or guys like us, or normal people who maybe have done a marathon and are looking at, you know, the next step of how they can challenge themselves, establishing a very strong reason why is very important, because it is a massive commitment and it definitely shouldn't be underestimated. And a marathon distance, again, shouldn't be underestimated, but this is obviously a totally different ballpark, really. And we'll talk about some of the training things that we're having to adapt to, but I mean, it is quite different to marathon training. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Yeah, it is quite different. Yeah, and I think absolutely doing it for dad and for charity is definitely part of the motivation for me. And I also think, and I think a lot of runners will relate to this, having been in lockdown in the UK now for the best part of a year, you know, a lot of people have really discovered running and a love of running. And my feeling over the course of that time has been, when the time comes, grab every opportunity and go out there and do all the things that I perhaps wasn't brave enough to do before this pandemic came along. So that's part of the motivation for me as well, is just to try and push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit. And it seemed like the logical next step from marathon to go up to ultra. Could have gone to 50 kilometers, but hey, we went to 100.
Yeah, why not start big? But so yeah, just establish the first thing I think any ultra runner should do is have a really strong reason why you're doing it, and hold on to that, because there will be really difficult times throughout the journey where you're going to have to relate back to that why you're doing it. And if it's just for the sake of it, there will be times probably where you do fail. But if we go on then to getting started with training, because we didn't have a clue basically, did we? And that's where having someone like James running it with us and being able to give us advice about, you know, what gear to wear, what training to do as a starting point, all the way through to sort of what to eat and stuff like that, and how to recover better, has been incredibly beneficial for both of us. So I mean, how important do you think that's been, Nick? Because I'm sure there'll be people listening to this who might be thinking about an ultra but haven't got anyone really to ask about it.
Yeah, massively important. I mean, I think the temptation is to think that you just have to run a lot, and yes, of course you do. And when we talk about training plans, we are running a lot. But if you just do that without any structure or without any strategy, I'm pretty confident a lot of runners will get injured, particularly if it's not something that you're used to doing. So the advice that we've been given from James, who has been there and done that, and he knows how to get through these events. And also we'll talk about a few other places that we've found really helpful in a moment. But the advice that we've been given, I think, has helped actually provide a bit of focus to the training. And I've learned a lot over the last 2 months actually about running in terms of how to prepare. So actually, I thought we should start with you, Chris, because when we started reaching out to get support for this journey, we got a bit of a mixed bag, didn't we?
We did, yeah. So I thought, given the fact that we've only done one marathon, and it wasn't a particularly comfortable marathon, it was very difficult. I thought maybe we should get some expert run coaching advice. So I actually reached out to a couple of local run coaches. I know you did the same, Nick, but I want to actually read out a reply that I got, which is, "Hi Chris, with regards to your case specifically, you've chosen a pretty serious challenge for your first ultra. It's not impossible to make the step to ultra without having mastered a marathon, but usually that would be a 50k ultra rather than a 100k ultra. The thing that would concern me the most is your training volume. I was really expecting to see that you are running 50 to 70 miles a week rather than per month. Equally, volume needs to be increased slowly, especially if you've had injury problems before. I don't mean to sound bleak or negative because I'm only going off one email, so a lot of this is opinion, but honestly, I think you'd be advised to comfortably run a marathon before trying to run more than 2 in a row. That said, I'm quite bad at racing road marathons and pretty good at racing ultra marathons, but these things aren't always linear. I appreciate this probably wasn't the response you were hoping for. So I obviously forwarded that straight on to you, Nick. What was your thoughts when we got that response?"
Yeah, pretty bleak. but
I honestly wasn't actually expecting that, but what it did tell me is that obviously we could have gone for a 50k ultra. We've gone for a big ultra, and what it did tell me is that it's not a joke, and the task we have to get to the finish line is massive, to be fair, isn't it?
Yes, but I also think what that showed me is that I think there's a much wider spectrum of ultra marathon runners than there are marathon runners. The margins between them are much greater. So just I think it's worth saying at this point, to be really clear, like we just want to finish, and it is going to take us a very long time. And the ultra that we're doing, it is advertised as a run hike, and there is a 24-hour cutoff. So it's a very, very generous time allowance. And the company, Rat Race, they've got a 90% plus finish rate. So I'm going to touch on this a little bit when I talk about what I found that has worked really well for me. But I think there's a lot of variation in how people prepare for running an ultra marathon. I wonder whether this coach thought that we might be looking to do a 12-hour, time, and we're not.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
We want to cross that finish line, and that's pretty much the extent of my expectations for that day.
I mean, having read what he said there, Nick, I asked a few friends that I know who have done walking marathons, for instance, how difficult was a walking marathon? And they all said it was actually incredibly difficult. So even if you walked the entire 100K, it's not. It's an incredibly difficult challenge. And obviously James has done quite a few ultras previous, so we asked him as well for how he had described the pain of an ultra, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was along the lines of you will go deeper and further into your soul and the pain inside you than you'll ever go before, and you'll ever go again. So even if you walk the entire thing, I think it's going to be criminally painful.
Because it's time on feet, isn't it? And
Exactly.
That's the thing. The slower you go, the longer you're on your feet and you're out there. And walking, whilst it is much less impact, it burns less calories than running. It's still doing something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I'm not under any illusions about how hard this is going to be, even if we do walk a significant chunk of it.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll do the training right, and we obviously aren't planning to walk a significant part of it, but walking will definitely be part of our strategy on the day. But I mean, we have had some positive stuff back on our journey to find expert advice. So Nick, why don't you tell us about the Ultra Runners playbook and the training plan that we have settled on?
Yeah, I love this resource. We're not affiliated in any way, but we might be able to pop the link perhaps in the show notes for this, because I think it's great. So I just stumbled across this really. It's a website run by a coach who's called Thomas Watson. He does marathon training plans. He does ultra marathon training plans. But what I loved about it was it's pitched at all sorts of different levels. So the program that we're following is called Just Finish. There's a lot of free stuff that you can access and some really good tips and advice, but then you can actually also pay to get some access to some even more detailed advice. And what I like is that there's a lot of information scattered around the internet, isn't there, about ultra marathon running, and it's all quite varied. So you've got the response that we've just had there. This is just collated everything into one place in a really nice way. So it covers every aspect of training, how to motivate yourself, how to stay positive. It covers nutrition. It covers pre and post run, warm up, cool downs, long runs, training runs. There's Google Sheets, which you can adapt for your own training plans. I love it. I think it's brilliant. And it's a really great resource if you're starting out and you just need something that's going to give you all the answers you need in one place.
Yeah.
That's what really stood out for me.
Do you think that everything on the internet, or not everything, but the majority of stuff on the internet is assuming that to do something like this, you are a very keen runner? Because my general perception is that most of the stuff that I've read in terms of advice and all that sort of thing is more geared around your 12 to 14 hour ultra marathon runner, rather than your very beginner sort of just finish, maybe sort of do 18 hours.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Totally agree. I think there's a category of ultramarathon runners that are completionists, who are challenge-based runners, who are doing this because it's a challenge and maybe, like we are, raising money for charity. They're not going to be regular ultramarathon runners. that's a bit of a gap in the market, I think, that doesn't seem catered for, because when you hit training plans, they're pretty intimidating actually. But what this training plan showed me is that there is a way of doing this that fits in with a busy life. We're both dads, we've both got busy jobs. It had to work for me within the parameters of my life. And I feel more confident having found it that that is doable. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think when you look at a marathon, ultra marathon training plan, and you think, my goodness, that looks pretty full on, but you don't always know what the training plan is building you to. Is it to run the whole thing in, like you say, 10 to 12 hours? Well, no chance for us. So
Yeah.
it's about finding what, that resource that actually speaks to you as a runner, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And I think before we move away from like the start of our training, I think it's we should mention jeffing, because that has been quite a fundamental part of how we've scaled up to some of the bigger distances that we've run so far. So why don't you tell us about your experience so far with jeffing? Because it's not something that comes naturally, I think, to either of us, is it? That there does require a certain mindset where I'll explain what jeffing is in a minute, but you need to be okay with stopping, which isn't in everyone's nature.
Yeah. So it's a running technique founded by a guy called Jeff Galloway. Its intervals are running and walking, and it's very, very good for beginners, but actually I think it's just as good for more experienced runners, particularly if you are prone to injury. So when we were running or preparing for the Brighton Marathon, every time I increased distance, I found that I was getting injured, and I'm desperate to avoid that this time round. So jeffing's been quite revelatory for me in terms of finding a way of increasing mileage safely. Is that
Yeah,
similar to your experience, Chris? Would you say?
I completely agree. I think it's been a breath of fresh air. I think I can speak for both of us that we both feel a lot fresher, and neither of us are getting the same sort of niggles that we were getting during the marathon training. And I think I've spoken to quite a few friends about this, who have asked about our training. They've seen runs on Strava or Garmin, and I've explained to them about jeffing, and they kind of look at me and they're like, "What? Like I'd never do that." And I think the beauty of it is that you can tailor it based on your fitness level. So and it's all about experimentation. So we're still in that phase of experimenting what sort of intervals we should have between running and walking. So I think both of us are doing 4 minutes running, 1 minute walking. But my actual times, if you look at the data on Strava, don't suffer at all. So I'm running further, more comfortably, and exactly the same time as I would run it if I was just running the whole thing. And I try and explain that to people, and some people would literally look at me like I'm ludicrous. But I do think that if I was running for, say, a half marathon distance, I probably wouldn't do jeffing as my training. So for me, it is for longer endurance events, but I still find that even if I did a jeffing run for like a 5K distance, my time would be pretty much the same as even if I ran the whole thing normally. So I've, as I said, found it a breath of fresh air, and but it
I mean,
does take getting used to. Yeah.
that's a big part of what Jeff Galloway's argument is. He said that it won't affect your time. If anything, you can actually go quicker, because when you're running, you can push harder, and
Yeah.
you can also push harder for longer, because if you start the walking at the beginning of the race, when you feel like you don't need it, it delays the onset of the fatigue. And also, I think with ultra marathon training, the long runs are long, and for me, it's a mental thing as well, where I know that, okay, I've got 4 minutes of effort, but then I know I've got a break, and it really helps me when I'm struggling to sort of compartmentalize the race a little bit, the run a little bit, and chunk
Yeah.
it.
That's a great point. And I think just to go back to what Jeff Galloway said, I mean, he is an Olympian. So anyone who questions, can you run fast still by doing jeffing? Is it just for amateurs, or do like serious runners use it as well? They absolutely do. This guy is a very serious runner who's done over 50 marathons, upwards of 100, I think, if not more. So he's far more experienced than me and you. But for us, so far it's been great for avoiding injury and those little mini recoveries throughout. Even this morning, we both did a 10-mile run as part of the plan. I feel fine. I'm tired, but I feel fine. Whereas not like a year ago, as if I'd have done that as part of the marathon training, I probably would have been exhausted and a bit sore and achy and like getting cramps and stuff. So yeah, it's been great for me, and it is just sort of tailoring it and tweaking it to fit your fitness regime, I guess. And as I said, for us, it's 4 minutes running, 1 minute walking, but you could tweak that to 3 minutes running, 2 minutes walking, or 9 minutes running, 1 minute walking. It really does depend. But if we move on then to the mindset of running long distances, because I know this is a really important one, and it is massively different to running short distances. So Nick, talk a little bit about your perception of what mindset you need to run these long distances, because it is different, isn't it?
It is different, and I think what I've taken away from the Ultra Runners playbook, the key lesson really is to think about time on feet above all else rather than pace. And certainly, you know, when you're training to do a half or a marathon, you often have a target, don't you? You have a time that you want to run to, and that then shapes and guides your training. Whereas when you're training for an ultra marathon, I think it's all about just building time on your feet and actually, to some extent, sort of switching off the Garmin, switching off Strava, so that you're just concentrating on running comfortably for a very, very long time. So it's conditioning yourself to run long, not fast. They talk about becoming an endurance monster. And actually, I was just thinking when you were talking about Jeff in there that when we did the marathon, I don't know how comfortable I would have felt walking after like 4 minutes. I think I would have felt a little bit self-conscious and embarrassed. But actually, I think my early perception of the ultra running community and culture is quite different, because you can't run 100. Well, some people can run 100 kilometers, but there will be many, many runners that will be building walking into their race day. So there's a much higher focus, I think, on just being out on your feet for a very, very, very long time and conditioning your body to be able to do that without really worrying about pacing. Now, to be fair, that I think changes if you become more competitive, but certainly at the level that we're at, where we just want to get through the 100 kilometers, that's my perception. Have you noticed any other kind of big differences in terms of the way we're approaching it to the marathon training, for example?
I definitely think you're right that pace just goes out the window, really. And even when we've run our longer runs, I was quite conscious at the start of like I wanted to run it, at a reasonable time. And you get all this sort of feedback, don't you? It's just like I've had someone literally say, not directly about us, but I've heard someone say, "Oh, I hate those people on Strava who run slowly and have to say like ultra run training dash slow run or something like that, because they're trying to almost justify why they're running slowly." And I probably would have been one of those people where if you'd have asked me 6 months ago and I'd run a slow 10 miles, I probably would have put like slow run or something like that. Maybe I wouldn't have, but
I
I
do.
would have been, yeah. I mean, I would have been more bothered about it. Whereas now, it's just like I don't actually care, because pace is totally irrelevant when you're training for an ultra the way we are training for it anyway, where it's like it's not competitive in any way. And it's totally different style of running. I think
Yeah.
if we were training for a half marathon, everything about our training would be different. And when we talk about mindset, it's not just the mindset to run endurance, it's also the mindset of being able to run when you're tired, when you're mentally tired, when you're in pain. Like manage pain, I think is quite a big one. Even obviously, as we get closer towards the event, we're going to have to think about things like fueling on the move, properly fueling on the move, not just having an energy gel, which are things that are going to happen on race day. So in terms of the mindset you need, and it goes back to the why. I think you've got to be very disciplined and you've got to want it, because there will be times when you're knackered, and if you're training for a half marathon, you could easily skip a day, and both of us have skipped days on our training plans. But you do need to get used to running in pain and on tired legs. But again, to re-emphasize what you said, like pace is absolutely irrelevant, and I think again that's one of the biggest things we've taken away from the ultra runners playbook. But I mean that segues onto the next section quite nicely, which is healthy habits, because I think James gave us two key bits of ultra running advice at the very start of our journey, which was to get used to the running on tired legs, but to add multiple runs in either one day or a weekend into training. So we've recently done 3 5Ks in one day, for example, but almost every weekend now it's back-to-back runs, isn't it? So a long run on the Saturday, shorter recovery run on the Sunday. And that does require quite a strict running regime. As James basically said to us, that 5 miles on a Saturday and 5 miles on a Sunday is, at the current stage that we're in, more beneficial than running 10 hard miles on a Saturday and then nothing on the Sunday. So, I mean, what's your perception on healthy habits, Nick? Because it is easy to obviously sit and watch Netflix, especially during lockdown at the moment. So you do need to be quite disciplined with yourself.
Yeah, I think it's about making sure that the training is focused. Every run there is a purpose, and you know what that purpose is. So the 3 5Ks in a day was fascinating for me, because 9 miles, if I was to run 9 miles in one go in the morning, I think that's very, very manageable. And yet by the time I was running that last 5K, I was in quite a lot of pain, because that you stiffen up, and actually it's replicating that feeling of like, it's been a long day. Sure, you've not been running all day, but you're running at a point when you would normally be resting. And I think, I think we probably will need to spend more time talking about habits, but I've even started looking at everything like bedtime. I've been looking at mornings, because those long runs, I've got a family, you've got a family, Chris. I need to get those long runs done in a time scale that allows me to spend time with my family over the weekend. I think building habits is going to be an absolute cornerstone of everything that we do, really. And it's worth saying as well at this point that I think, and I'm not very good at this, but it's clear that we're going to need to do some not gym work, but we're going to need to do some strength work as well. And that is something that I keep getting told, is that yes, you need to run a lot, but you also need to do some cross training. You need to do some core work, because that is what's going to keep your body together when things are starting to get hard in the ultra. So yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking of when you were talking about habits.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's often overlooked, and I've never really thought of like building strength work into running, but I do think for endurance running you have to have a strong core to power you through, and it reduces the chance of injury as well. So I am starting, I guess, or dabbling, you could call it, in some yoga to try and improve my flexibility, because something I struggle with massively, as you know, Nick, is I'm incredibly inflexible and I get a cramp a lot. But I haven't actually had that too bad since doing the jeffing and scaling back the pace a little bit. But the other thing I was going to say is I think it's really important that you communicate well with your loved ones and your housemates, because the sacrifices that you need to make to do an ultra, from a training point of view, you need support around you, because it is sacrifices for your partner or your housemates as well, because obviously a lot of time is going to be you running, and both of us are first time parents, as well, which is an additional complication. So we're trying to fit in quite a lot of running, which is very time consuming, around parenting, work, being a husband, all of that sort of stuff. So I do think the communication between partners and so on is absolutely vital, because if you have someone who doesn't support you and doesn't believe in your why, and for us obviously it's our dad, then that's going to be really difficult for you to get into a healthy habit, because you're constantly going to have someone saying don't go out for a run, and a negative influence on your training. What do you think about that?
I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone there by buying a running pram.
Yeah,
So
I mean, well, we're going to talk about some tips in a minute, but I think getting creative is vital, because everyone's in lockdown at the moment. It's really hard to train for these sorts of things. You don't have your usual event calendar running up to events. So even now, I had quite a nice training calendar lined up all the way until August now. All of them up to the end of May have been cancelled. So now we're looking at pretty much doing all of our training, or all of the base training, on our own without the event atmosphere, which I'm going to massively miss. So I do think those sorts of things, like anything that you can do to get a bit creative and get running and incorporate it into your day, is really important.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say there as well, in terms of support network, for me, it's also accountability. So I really like having people that hold me accountable, and that would be you and it would be James. So I will say to you guys that tomorrow is a 10-mile run and I'm going out at 7 o'clock, and just putting that on record really, really helps me, because I know that you guys will call me on it if I don't do it. And I
Yeah.
think when your own personal motivation goes, I think having a team around you is where you can feed off that, can't you? And it can get you through those difficult days when you're actually really struggling, and your own personal motivation isn't enough to get you out the door. That makes a big difference for me. I mean, on that note then, Chris, it's early days, but already I think we've got some advice that we'd like to share, some tips that we've been using in terms of just keeping going. So what for you has been the kind of key things that have kept you motivated, kept you going so far?
So I kind of mentioned it then, but creativity, I think, is absolutely vital at the moment. I think for the first 6 months of lockdown, I was in a really good routine, but that routine gets so boring when you're doing it all the time, and it's really easy to get bored of the same running routes, running on your own and so on. And as I said, like, there isn't the events, and obviously you can't run in groups at the moment. So for you, as you said, it was you've bought a running pram, which I think is a great idea. But I've done things like going for long walks with my wife and baby, and building the walking into it. So doing sort of like 15 miles, but walking half of it just to get miles on my feet, and obviously doing the walking bit with my wife and baby, but running off and then coming back every now and again. So yeah, you've got to get creative, and also just be mindful of what you can and can't do at the moment. So you can exercise at the moment outdoors with one friend. So I know you've done a bit of running with a friend, haven't you? Annoyingly,
Yeah.
we don't actually live that close to each other anymore, so we haven't really done any running together, which is really difficult for me in particular, because I hate running on my own, really, particularly
Yeah.
long distances. But I mean, any other tips from you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I would say podcasts, music, audio books, particularly because the nature of the running is you're going a bit slower. So I feel like actually you can sort of enjoy those things a bit more than
Mm.
if you're really, really pushing it and you're kind of locked into the running. I love just drifting off a little bit on the long runs, and you realize you've run a couple of miles and you've barely noticed.
That's a great point, to be fair. I would say that's actually one of the biggest tips, I think. Scale back your pace to a very enjoyable pace. And for me, who's someone who isn't a natural runner, and I don't necessarily enjoy it or love it like some people do, I've really started to enjoy running, because I'm less out of breath. I'm less pushing the boundaries of my physical boundaries. And you're right, like, I put a podcast on, I actually start laughing sometimes because I'm listening to a podcast or something like that. And it's a really good headspace. I do a lot of my best thinking actually when I'm doing this running, because I'm not pushing myself physically. And the
Yeah.
other one for me is just back to the creativity thing, like, mix it up a bit and try virtual challenges. We've both done virtual challenges over the course of the pandemic. Join a virtual running club, and that goes back again to being accountable for something. And the other thing for us is obviously announcing it on a platform like this. I think it's incredibly hard to back out now. We've publicly told everyone that we're going to do it, and the more we talk about it on the podcast and on our website and so on, the more it's basically like an accountability diary, isn't it?
Yeah, and as that Just Giving page gets bigger and bigger as well, you get a sense of responsibility that you need to deliver for your backers and people who are supporting you. So I definitely feel that. I definitely, Myeloma UK have reached out to us and they're delighted to have us on board. It's not a particularly big charity because it's not a particularly common type of cancer. So I think they're very grateful for having people representing them in events. And obviously it has been a very hard year for charities as well, because they've lost such a massive source of their income, which is, the sporting events. So that's something else that I just keep thinking about that and thinking, right, can't let these people down. We've got to do it now.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think to wrap up part one of our ultra running diaries I think we should finish with a couple of stats just to hold us accountable and give everyone an idea of sort of how much we're actually running at the moment. So if you go back to my November and December of 2020, I didn't run more than 25 miles in either of those months. I then ran 65 miles in January, but I also walked 80. And I ran 70 miles in February. Currently, we're on 15 miles in March, so it's not huge numbers at the moment. But what are you, when we do the next podcast episode, what are you thinking that monthly total will be?
So the March, if we stick to the training plan, the March monthly total is going to be around 85 miles.
Okay, so it's not massively building up then.
It fluctuates because the program, there are every 3 to 4 weeks, there's like a slightly less strenuous week where you sort of consolidate the gains that you've made from the previous 3. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna increase, but it's quite gentle. And to be clear, we're on a 26-week training program. So it is that's another big difference. 16-week marathon training is quite common, isn't it? And
yeah.
3 months. But this is very, very gradual because obviously you've got to get to a much higher end point. So yeah, that's where I would like to be by the end of March.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a good target. And yeah, I guess that's it for part one. But we're going to be covering quite a few topics along the way. One of them will do a proper session on Jeffing and our takeaways, I guess, from doing it for a bit longer. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully you'll enjoy the season.
Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the VV Nation podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.
If you like what you heard, don't forget to rate it, share it, and subscribe. And please stay fit and active.
And you can follow us on our social channels on Twitter at VVNationFit, Facebook at VVNation, and Instagram at VV_Nation. Also, check out our website, vvnation.co.uk, for all of our podcast episodes. And don't be afraid to send us a message and get in touch. Thank you.